Sent you the invite. All you do is accept it and you'll be on screen. Lovely.
Hey, Romit.
There you go, buddy. How are you doing? All good?
Yeah, very well, thanks. How are you?
Good to see you. Good to see you. All good.
Hey,
all good.
You know what's pretty funny?
Yeah.
You know what this is?
What's that? Is it a band?
It's a hair tie.
Oh. I know.
Almost long enough to tie back.
Fantastic. Good. You're getting there. Fantastic. Then you get
Yeah, a bit here, a bit here. Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever get there, but anyway.
I'm just keeping it as long as it's gonna stay there. I'm losing most of it, I think.
I get it. Yeah. So I'll just put the hat on back to front because it makes me look a little bit younger.
Yeah.
And cooler.
Super. So where are you right now? Malaysia?
Malaysia, yeah. It's
Malaysia.
where I'm living. Yeah, my base, where it's been for the last 8 years.
Good. And how are things in Malaysia right now?
Yeah, I mean, with regards to the virus, I think things are looking really good. I mean, they've only had like less than 100 cases the last 5 to 6 days.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, 50 odd today, 34 yesterday. So there's some talk that it still may extend because we have a Ramadan period, which is the fasting for the kind of Muslim culture that's here. So they're saying that the should end by the 28th, but we're expecting that might push through sometime into May. So we'll just see.
Right. I hope it gets there in a safe way and everything is back to normal, or the new normal, which is going to be the new normal now, I guess.
Yeah. What is that going to be like? We don't know yet.
No, the new normal is going to be very different from what we had before. I used to greet people with a hug earlier. I don't know what we're going to do now.
I'm not hugging you, bro. I'm gonna give you an elbow or a wave. Exactly. We'll have to go Thai style.
That's right.
Yeah.
Same as in India, the namaste, which we had, I guess, was the safest way to greet earlier.
Right.
So good. So we see a lot of eyeballs on you today, and straight away we can exploit a little bit of your presence.
Oh yeah.
It's great to have you here. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
I got my range set up here.
Super, fantastic.
This is my makeshift academy, my office.
So we're gonna have a lot of live lessons here and a lot of
that side of it.
Clarifications that people can ask for. I'm just gonna adjust the screen so that I see a little bit of you. That's it.
Sure.
That's good. Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we go into all the details of the golf swing and the technology and the systems. Let me put it that way. The great systems that we have, and most of the teachers are actually coming into this into the system of having one, and
yes.
which is the future, which is the way forward, as we know. Otherwise, everything is like a hit and miss, which is not the case in golf anymore. And we have enough data now in the last 15 to 20 years, which have with TrackMan, with pressure plates, with the wrist devices, just to tell us a lot of body mechanics and how the body works. And people have done a lot of research in the last 15 years. And I think just to get an idea of that, we'll have a lot of discussion on that topic. But a little bit about you before we start into that.
Yeah. So my background, I've been coaching for 20 years. Born and raised in Australia, in Melbourne. Not sure. Yeah, been down to Oz. No. So just like a very sporty kid, was into lots of different sports. Golf and football were my kind of passions growing up, and picked up on sports quite well, and really enjoyed them, and ultimately just took on golf as my what I wanted to do. Wouldn't say for my living, but it's just I wanted to make it a part of my life. And obviously at that age, all you ever wanted to do was play, be a tournament player, see yourself against the best in the world.
Right.
I decided to do a traineeship when I was 22 back in Melbourne. We have a system in Australia where you can go to Q school, which is, you know, most common in Asia, or you can take the route of a trainee professional. You still have to be a good, you know, good player. You have to be a 3 handicap or less. And you go into the system with the Australian PGA where you learn, you know, a little bit across the board, you know, about the golf profession. So that was a 3-year course, which was pretty taxing. Got through that, passed the playing requirements, which I think in Australia we have the strongest playing requirements for a trainee.
Wow. How much was that, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so when I was doing it, we had to play 40 rounds a year and basically keep the average under 5, 4, and then 3. So the first year was 5, the second year was 4, and that was at about 40 rounds a year. So, you know, my scoring average at the end of my 3rd year was about 1.5. You know, a lot of guys didn't get through it. A lot of guys didn't get through the academics. But ultimately wasn't really, I didn't really feel it was low enough to be able to, you know, make a living on tour. And lucky or unlucky enough, I had a back injury after I finished my traineeship, about 8 months after, and that kind of sidelined me from some of the playing I was doing. But, you know, I've told this story a few times. I think I kind of made a decision in my 2nd year as a trainee that I wanted to teach. I think I realized that my competitive scoring was not really at the level that I think it needed to be. Now at 20, let's say 5 years old, 24 years old, which I think is kind of long enough to figure out when you've been playing since 7.
Right.
And yeah, I kind of enjoyed teaching all the way back then. I would say, you know, my type of character, being a little shy, a little bit recluse, you know, could spend hours in a driving range in the corner without having to really deal with other people, meant that I enjoyed, when I started coaching, really working with one-on-one students. You know, I wasn't big on doing kids clinics and things like that. So I think all the way back then, I think I had some good awareness of myself, my character, my communication style, which ultimately had to improve a lot, and kind of the pathway that I took, which was, you know, coaching and ultimately more on the, you could say, like high performance, trying to figure out the individual, you know, kind of one-on-one, if you like, versus maybe a group environment situation. And of course, I've taken a few different pathways along that way, you know, with aim point, as you know, and some different different areas which I've tried to really upskill myself in short game and full swing, and, you know, all the different stuff with player development. But that was pretty much my early years anyway, and how I got into coaching.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way, and that's a great start, because that kind of, I think, consolidated the base that for a good teacher, which is you had to maintain a certain average score, so you had to be a good player. You know, 3-year course, you know, intensive course, it seemed like, the Australian PGA degree course. And
Correct.
I think you were an early adapter as well, like you said, into the short game. So you had a lot of technology behind you. You got the Sam Putt Lab going, and you got a lot of other technology, the foot mats, you know, just to understand how things worked. And it kind of intrigued you, which is great, because I can deal with it, because I do a lot of that intrigue. I have a lot of that intrigue myself. And it's great to know how you've come about. And you said you started teaching at about what, the age 24, which is really young. And well, so you're not that experienced, because you still look very young.
Well, 20 years plus 24, you could do the math on that.
That's a youngster right there. No, good. But you know what I really like about you is you're always willing to help the young ones, especially. And the young upcoming golfers is something that I've seen you support a lot. And you'd like to share that knowledge which you've accumulated. You go out of your way to learn more things, getting into the thick of things, you know, traveling the world. I know that you went to America and you followed teachers around just to pick up the knowledge.
Sure.
And I think that's a very, 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 very good way to accumulate a lot of first-hand knowledge directly from the teachers themselves. And good to hear these things. And tell us, what are your plans, and what are you up to, and what are your future plans with regard to teaching now?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really happy basing myself in Malaysia. You know, apart from Thailand, and if you kick India out of the way, I think you know, Malaysia is very central to Asia. So I like the position. I've enjoyed kind of living here and the lifestyle. So there's no immediate plans to like, oh, I want to go back to Australia or anything like that. And there's no plans also to kind of really, move to another country, Europe or America. This is where I'm calling home for the foreseeable future. I'm happy with the base that I've created here. As you know, I've been lucky enough to develop a good, strong, group of students from India. Just really dedicated. I love working with the students. They're very inquisitive, very dedicated. It's not something I ever expected to get into when I moved to Malaysia, if I'm being honest. I just thought, well, I'm going to be working at this golf club, which is a beautiful golf club at the mines. And, I'm going to hopefully get myself busy and, work with lots of pros and up and coming young amateurs. And all of a sudden I find myself, with a huge database of students from India, a lot of young, eager juniors and elite amateurs and pros. And it's been great. And I think the thing that I didn't realize, when you're in Malaysia, you're not really just in Malaysia, you're kind of in Asia. And so having contact with Hong Kong and Thailand and Singapore and China and all these different countries and being able to travel around has been great. But I have kind of scaled things down in the last year and a half. I've really focused more on, I'd say, 3 countries, and that's really where my focus is going to be going forward. That's Malaysia, India and Thailand, essentially, because that's where I find students can travel into most, and the most kind of accessibility as well. So I don't really have like pie in the sky. I want to, again, like go to a different country and teach US tour players or anything like that. I kind of appreciate where I am and who I get to work with. And, if I'm able to, work with great, up and coming young juniors and see them progress into LET and LPGA, if that's their goal, if it's a college scholarships, if that's their goal, because, academics, then, that's what I think they entrust me to do, is to try and get them to a level where they're getting the most out of their games, reaching their goals, and pretty happy with it, to be honest.
Wow.
Happy with where I am.
That's good, yeah. That's good, yeah. That's good, that's great, because that also kind of gives the idea that you're stable, so your students also know where to find you. And, they're not going to keep looking for alternatives right there, because you're going to be there for them. And they know exactly that you're not going anywhere, which is a great, very strong value to give them, to offer to them. Some questions coming up in the meantime. One is about your looks, which is as good as you still look like you're in your late 20s, Quigs.
That's Jamie. He's Australian, so yeah.
There you go.
He could be being really nice or taking the piss a little bit.
There's Hiro Yoshi thanking you for the tutorial posts.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
And we just run through this quickly, and we'll get to the big questions. How is teaching different from India and overseas? Someone asked. He's a parent of a young girl golfer.
Overseas, I'll just assume he means when I was teaching back in Australia.
How's teaching different from India and overseas? So, is there a difference between what's happening in India and what's happening outside India? Is what he's questioning.
I guess we can go down a few different angles there. Are we talking about like facility? Are you talking about the coaches? Are we talking about the students themselves?
I think what he wants to know is, do we have better teachers outside India, or do we have good teachers here back home as well? For me,
I would say on the whole, India still has a lot of catching up to do on the teaching front. I think like any country, you're always going to have, because you would call India like an emerging golfing market. I know that you have still a fairly long history of, great players on the LPGA like Simi and Arjun, and I'm sure I've missed one or two there. Let's say the pioneers for you guys, but the teaching lags, in that sense, going to lag quite a bit behind. So, guys like yourself and like Tarun, and I'm going to miss some of the good guys. I can't think of, but there's a handful of you that I know are very willing to put yourself out there as far as education, very willing to put yourself out there as far as, you know, travel to the US, do certifications and whatnot. And what I see is happening, I see a lot more interest from Indian coaches coming through. Now, if you take an example, you know, even though it's a slightly different country and, you know, more developed, whatever, the developed nation of, let's say, South Korea, you look at where they were 20 or 15 years ago, because I actually spent a little bit of time over there. There were basically expat coaches going over there to teach, and the expat coaches were put on a pedestal. And that's pretty much who all the South Koreans would go to. So what's happened over the course of 10 years has been a cycle of all these students that were trying to make it as players, didn't make it, whatever, and then they've kind of fallen into teaching. And now there's, you know, so many awesome coaches in like South Korea. You know, I believe, you know, if you want to go with like Kevin Na's brother, and there's Joe Kim, who's a good friend of mine, there's lots of non-English speaking Koreans out there doing an awesome job. So all of a sudden they've lifted. The same happened in Singapore, the same's happened in Thailand. So I think if you've got a culture that is big on education, which I know India is,
right,
very inquisitive, which I know Indians are, ask a lot of questions, want to learn, then it's just a matter of, you know, years and maybe the course of, you know, half decade and a decade before there's a push with, you know, the quality of the instruction coming through. And guys like you lead that, guys like Tarun, guys like myself that make visits over there and are very open to have other instructors come and listen and work with me. Not a big deal at all. And I think that's the way it should be.
I think that's brutally honest coming from you, Stephen, because that's exactly how it is. And I guess there's a new generation of teachers who are very inquisitive and wanting to know. So I have a lot of inquiries. Tarun has a lot of inquiries from teachers.
Yep.
And you also saw some of them coming out to Thailand recently to gain some knowledge, because they are slowly understanding there's a lot of things that they need to cover up.
Yeah.
And they have
Jesse,
to make that. Yeah,
I'm trying to think of a few of the others. I hate forgetting names. You know, I mean, there's a few guys that are, you know, a little bit grayer than me, and they've just been around for such a long time doing an awesome job. So I'm not great with names, but you could probably reel them off faster than what I could.
No, there are definitely a lot of names over here, but if you start taking them, there are about 400 of them, but we have the numbers definitely. But yes, definitely they are getting better, and of course they're trying to educate themselves at the highest level. We have some US Pro players, from Jesse coming up, with Vijay coming up, and Bambi is doing a great job in Bangalore as well. Yeah. So
I mean, the young boy that I'll just a quick one, then you can ask me. The young boy that Vash, yeah, I mean, I worked with Vash for a good year and a half or 2 years. I mean, he was a good young pro. I ultimately probably could have done okay on the PGTI.
So
yeah,
he's
maybe
one of the
he's
young
seen,
ones,
yeah. I mean, he goes to all the seminars. He's asking me questions, you know, every other day, probably as well as all other guys. And, you know, these are the sorts of guys that are in a 5 to 10 year window are going to be working with the better elite juniors. You know, everyone's got to start somewhere, but, and all they've got to do is keep putting themselves out there and, you know, keep listening and learning. And I think it's just going to be a natural progression.
Right. Rahul is one of the young ones also who's been showing a lot of interest, Bajaj.
Yeah,
and
he comes down and watches me teach quite a bit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Rehan, he's still trying to work on his swimming stroke, but anyway.
Good. There you guys. There's the youthful one. So how much of aim point are you still doing, Stephen? Says Robin.
Yeah, so I would tend to do it more on an individual basis rather than a group basis. Whereas, you know, that 2.5, 3 years ago, you know, I was traveling a lot, educating other coaches and doing group classes. There's a couple of regions that still don't have instructors, such as like Hong Kong and Philippines. So I tend to still make some regular trips there per year. But aside from that, it would be more just individual.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it would be, I mean, maybe 5 or 10% of my business now.
Now some serious questions coming in from junior golfer parents. How does a junior golfer taking coaching know that he is with the right coach, one? And what are the broad parameters to look for to assess this?
Great question. You've got to do your research. I think that's first and foremost. I don't think it's bad in the short term as a parent to say, okay, and be really open with the coach. Okay, Romit, you know, my son, daughter, they've been working with this junior coach. You know, we know that you're a more senior coach. We want to spend a couple of days with you. We want you to go on course with my daughter, son, daughter. We want you to, you know, go through the whole 9 yards and just kind of see how you click. But just so you know, we've got 3 coaches in mind. We've done our research. So we're not going to commit to anything just yet. But this is what we've decided to do. I think that you just have to kind of be nice and open and honest with the coach, but do your research for sure. There's no point just, you know, throwing, you know, blindly at the dartboard and hope that you get kind of a lucky pick, whether that's an international coach, whether that's a good local coach that you want to go with. Ask other parents. Because it's such a small community, golf, it's very easy to go, well, okay, we're going to look at Romit, but, you know, Ria that works with Romit for the last 2 years is also friends with my daughter, and I'm going to ask, you know, how's it going? You know, how's the relationship? What does he teach? Blah, blah, blah. And same with this coach or same with that coach. So yeah, it's just kind of gathering information. And, you know, some of it has to be maybe a little bit to do with the demographic, things like that. If that's not an issue, then, you know, the parent might even look for an international coach.
Right.
You know,
Right.
As well. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that.
Great answer. I think that was a very, very honest answer there. Vignesh Anand asks the question, what advice would you give to someone who's hardworking, passionate, etc., and not being able to get scoring averages down from mid-70s to high 60s?
Mid-70s to high 60s. Well, everyone has scoring barriers that they need to break along the way to getting to those numbers. So first thing I would say is, you know, I would audit the student. How long have they been playing? What's their level of experience? Are they experienced in tournament golf? I mean, I remember myself personally, it was 3 years to get my scoring average from a decent amateur level where I was playing off 3 or 4, you know, down to being able to have, I would say, getting into a comfort zone where I could be under par and continue to break par. Now, sometimes that can be a psychological barrier, such as the scoring average. I would say anytime you get the chance to put yourself in an environment where you can play with better players, be that professionals, practice with better players, hear about their experience and how they've done it. Tournament golf is super important. I find that there's not enough kids at the moment generally playing enough golf in general, but also not in a competitive environment. So it's hard to kind of get the juices going when you're just playing practice rounds on your own. It's hard to get the juices going when you're having a social round. So you need to have competitive rounds against players that are ultimately better than you, that can push you beyond your limits. And I think that's a pretty important, the environment's important, I guess is what I'm trying to say, first and foremost.
Also, I think, Stephen, where lots of these kids are kind of get stuck is they try to figure out that if I can shoot under par on my home course where I keep playing, and I keep shooting under par on a regular basis, I'm then only ready to go out and play the tour or competitive golf.
Right.
So what they do is they kind of keep on staying within their golf clubs, and also their parents have this attitude also sometimes that, you know, if you're not shooting under par at your home golf course, what's the point of going and traveling and playing the tour? You know, so why spend so much money? You'd rather practice and play better, and then maybe we see once you kind of shoot an average of about 3 under par on your home course. So something like this, they also get caught on. Can you reflect on that as well?
I definitely think if you're looking at, you know, going into professional ranks, you know, be that say PGTI or whatnot. I mentioned this in a live the other night, and I was saying that, you know, if you look at like the scoring average, let's say in PGTI, just to make a cut,
right,
it's pretty competitive there when I look at it. Like you can't be over par.
No.
You have to be a couple under par, right? I know they have a secondary tour, etc. So and I know there's different ways to do it. There's not one exact way, like you have to be under par and then you can turn pro. I get that you could be upcoming and get there, but I would say, you know, if you're struggling around shooting 74 to 76, which is really just a good amateur score, and you kind of see yourself as being a professional, I think it's unrealistic.
Right.
I think you need to set some targets around scoring. Understand there's processes and everything like that, but you need to set some targets around scoring, or at least you need to have some awareness that if I'm currently at this average and I move from, let's say, this level to this level, I'm not all of a sudden going to be shooting 72s. Now, maybe with the right nurturing and in that environment, you can get pushed a little bit, but I still think that you have to be around the mark. Like you can't be like too far off, because you'll spend, you know, the first 17 weeks like Justin Rose did, you know, missing all those cuts.
Right.
And that could be for different reasons, of course. So I don't think any one tournament you should look at that as a barometer for, you know, I'm that good just because maybe you have a great week. I think you look at like a 6-month window. What's your competitive scoring average? Does that add up? You know, if it's around 71 to 73, there's a good chance that you're going to get through Q score with that. You know, you've still got to deal with that situation that particular week, but that's at least what the advice I'd give to my students. And I actually did, you know, a year or so ago, one of my students who was a top amateur in Malaysia, and I kind of gave him not really an ultimatum, but I said, this is where we need to be in order to go to Asian Q School. He wanted to go the year before. I said, I think you're wasting your time and your money. I said, let's work towards this. You know, it was a bit of back and forth. He was able to play a lot of local pro events, you know, had some up and down finishes, and, you know, 4 months out from Q School, you know, he checked out. He just wasn't there. And I don't think that was a bad decision. I mean, he didn't really have the scoring average that was necessary to even try Q School. Right. And, you know, I think at some level you have to be realistic. And if you're not incrementally improving and lowering your scores in a competitive environment, I think then you need to audit a lot of things. You need to have a good hard look in the mirror.
Right, absolutely, good. A little introspection will never harm you, it'll only help.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next question comes in, I think it's a technical question a bit, but per mile of increase in swing speed, how much distance increase should one get?
It's about 3 yards. Is that right?
Yeah, about 2.75, yeah, 2.75, I think, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah,
that's better at his TrackMan than me.
Yeah. Yeah, because ball speed, 1 mile an hour is equal to 2 yards increase.
There we
go. So basically, if it's clubhead speed, then it's 2.75.
1 point something, yeah. Got you. Yeah. Yeah.
So Robin asked another question. 3 with driver can change depending on AOA and baseline speed?
I didn't hear that. 3 with?
3 with driver, plus 3 with driver can change depending on AOA and baseline speed. Oh, so this is the question. I think he answered that question. So
okay.
That's yeah. So 3 with driver. Yeah, that's right. About 2.75. That's right. Correct, Robin.
Right.
Okay.
3 with driver. Okay. I was okay. I was there.
Okay, so let's get to another one. Is golf expensive in India, and how are they growing the game? Well, golf is. Go ahead. It's okay.
Oh, you could probably answer that better than me.
Yeah, golf is expensive, maybe in the larger cities or the main metros, but throughout the tier 2 cities and the smaller cities, golf is a very inexpensive sport, and that's only because the number of golf courses available as compared to the number of players. So the demand and supply basically kind of swings that around. So in Delhi, where we are, so in the heart of Delhi, obviously golf is a bit more expensive than everything. But definitely there are public golf courses which are, the green fees is about, let's say, about less than $10. So that's not too bad for 9 holes. And for 18 holes, it's about $15, which is not very expensive at all, if you come to look at it. And if you want to go to a driving range, I think it's 50 Indian rupees just to enter the driving range, which is less than $1. and just to hire some clubs. So you'll be spending maybe a couple of dollars just to hit 50 balls and hire a club and use the facilities. So it's not that expensive. And of course, there are various ways that we're trying to improve the game or grow the game. There are a couple of new driving ranges which have now started opening in the smaller tier 2 cities, and many more are required definitely, because India is a large country with a huge populace, and golf is also looked upon a bit like an elite sport, because it kind of occupies the most expensive real estate even in the small town. So only the elite people can actually get a club membership per se. So now with public facilities being thought about, and some of them have come up, I think golf is going to get a little bit within the reach of everyone. And that's how we're trying to get to the game. But yes, we also have to develop the teaching professional, and we're also trying to do that a lot. And so that they can attract more people into the game rather than, take them away from the game. Okay, so another question which comes up after this is, can you explain how is your swing different from a guy like Tiger's swing? What is to understand, what is the technical difference, and why do you think it's the way to go?
I thought they looked the same.
I bet the logo on your t-shirts also do.
Yeah, I used to be with Nike. Now I'm with Titleist FootJoy. What would be the difference? Yeah, there's a bank account difference there, isn't there? What would be? I would say actually, to answer that question, as honestly as I would if I was having a side by side, I would say the biggest difference, because one thing me and Tiger have in common is we're the same age. That's about where it ends. But the biggest thing I would say, if I was looking at my swing, I would say I have a bigger change in knee flex. Now, if I stood up, that would mean that. Can you see me okay there, Romit?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, that's good.
So I have a bigger change in knee flex in the backswing, which means that allows me to create a little bit more hip turn.
You want to do that left-handed?
So I can try and do that. Yeah, I'm not very good at this, but yeah.
That's right. So the right hip and the right hip is much higher than the left right there. There's a lot of hip tilt over there, and the right leg is extended. Yeah.
Tiger would have his trail leg a lot more flex than, say, what I would.
Right.
Now that could be because he's always done it. The reason why I do it is, one, I have not a good back. I have 2 bulge discs in my lower back, so I'm trying to take stress off that. As you know, the knee is it just flexes and extends. It doesn't twist around, so it's hard to get any rotational component in there. So the reason why I release my trail knee is it allows a lot more range of motion for me. Now, because I'm also getting a little older, I'll have to do this right-handed. I would say maybe in Tiger's more recent swing, he probably has his upper body in a little bit more flexion than mine. I have a little bit more extension. So I have this piece here. Now, again, I do that to add some length to my backswing. I do that to keep my my pivot fairly centered, because I have an issue with hitting behind the ball at times. Those would be the two biggest things that you might see in the backswing. Right.
Fantastic. I think that's a great explanation of why you do that and why it's different from Tiger. So next thing that we want to go into is, besides the skill and fitness, how much is psychological conditioning required to reach and play the professional level, and how do we go about that?
Oh, well, I mean, it's really everything at the end of the day. The players, I think the players' belief systems is some of the things that I've found with players that have had success over the years and haven't, could be the 2 biggest defining things between students that ultimately don't quite get there. Now, that could be underlying, which means it may have they maybe just don't have that in them. That may have been instilled at them from a very young age, or, you know, like a Jordan Spieth, for example, he just has a lot of self-belief in himself. You know, he just kind of built that in. So I think that from that standpoint, you know, I look at two things when it comes to that side of the game. I would say you've got the macro part of psychology, like, you know, when the chips are down, you know, how does that particular person behave? Do they get up? How do they see themselves? That sort of thing. Now, again, some of that is developed, and some of that could be, you know, just an inherent part of the individual. It's how they were brought up. It's how their parents raised them. It's maybe they went through some really tough times and they learned how to kind of figure it out. So I think you've got that kind of very kind of macro base, which I also think can be developed. That is probably where you and I could potentially have the most difference in a student, is taking them, you know, taking someone that doesn't really quite understand what it takes perhaps, and either, you know, showing maybe they want to do the work, but they don't know exactly what it takes, and being able to kind of show them the pathway going forward. Maybe that's how they practice, how they need to think. Maybe it's a book that they need to read. Maybe it's that conversation that you had with them at the end of the practice session on the side of the range because, you know, they were having a bad week or they just had a bad tournament. And, you know, those sorts of things I think are kind of very important. And then you obviously have the more of the kind of micro stuff, which is what's happening during their performance time. You know, how are they reacting to adversity on the golf course? How are they reacting, you know, let's say in tough situations, maybe there's an opportunity to get their tour card. Maybe there's an opportunity to win a tournament or have a good performance, you know, and then you're getting into things more about their routines, their mindset, their self-talk, you know, how, you know, all this kind of smaller piece stuff, which is obviously just as important. And I think that stuff can really, and I think that stuff can fluctuate. You know, you're going to have students that, you know, some days are just feeling invincible and they're thinking more clearly for whatever reason. And other days, you know, they just don't quite feel like they've got it. And, you know, whether that's to do with their game on that particular day or whether it's their mindset. So I'm always kind of looking at the macro and the micro side of the psychology. And trying to figure out, is it something that we need to build up more from a young age to kind of make sure that they're at least, they've got that toolbox when they're ready to go? Or is it, you know, is there a pattern in their performance that keeps coming up? You know, they keep missing cuts, or, you know, they put themselves in a position to win the tournament and they keep, you know, screwing up the last hole. You know, that's more of the smaller stuff that I think can be somewhat experience based as well.
Super. Okay, that's another angle to look at it from, because psychology and the other part does play a lot of, does have a lot of value in the system, and that's well explained. There you go. Yeah. Next one comes in is, this is going to be like a live demo. Hey guys, what's a good drill to stop me from hanging back at impact?
Hanging back?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna turn my iPad around.
Okay.
Just because then I think then you can see me right-handed. Yeah. But you'll have to tell me what you can see, because I won't be able to see it straight away.
All right.
I'm assuming you can. Yeah. Do I need to lift it up, down, or sideways?
Right now I can see the ceiling.
Do I need to go more down with the phone? Like that?
No, because we can still see just a white ceiling. Is it the ceiling which I'm looking at? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to spin that around. Give me one sec. How about that?
Yeah, there you go. I got the background. There you go. Yeah, that's perfect. That's okay. Perfect.
So hanging back, I mean, it's the hanging back question's a little bit of a tricky one, because I tend to see students that will just agree that a hang back is when the student's like too far back at impact. Maybe there's weight on the right side, or maybe the upper center's kind of fallen back this way. I would tend to look at what's happening at setup, which would call P1 to keep it simple, and where are they positioned at the top of the swing. I tend to find 90% of hand-back moves are because the student has too much secondary axis tilt, which means the upper body's staying too far back, which then causes them to move off the ball, and they just can't get back there. They don't know how to get back there, so they're back here. Or they might start off with their centers pretty well lined up, and then for whatever reason, they also kind of move off the ball too much and they stay back. So I'm always looking to make sure that the student is staying, I'd say, somewhat centered in their swing. So if I move my left shoulder too far down too quickly, I'd move towards a target. That would be too much. So I'm trying to get a balance between the amount that this moves down, the amount that the chest is turning, and the amount that it's extending, so they stay pretty centered. Now, normally from there, because the left hip's lower than the right and the left shoulder's down, it's very easy to move back, let's say, on top of the ball and get into a stronger impact position. So I tend to use that order because, you know, a lot of people will, when they look at themselves on a video and they might see themselves hanging back, they probably don't realize that it's an effect of something else. You know, it's not just, okay, I'm just hanging back. It's happened because of a poor setup. It's happened because of a poor pivot. So those are the areas I tend to look at first.
So while you're standing there, that's a good one. But while you're standing there, I want to just ask you a couple more questions, so you don't have to go back and forth. Lots of confusion about the loading patterns on the backswing, like you were talking about, of people moving back and off the ball. So could you just touch up a little bit on that loading pattern? You know, like people say that, you know, I get a lot of students who say that, well, I've been taught, you know, I need to go back a lot, which, you know, in the older times, there was a lot of theory over there. That's right. In the olden days, there was a lot of theory on that. There was a weight and mass or pressure, you know, so which is right, which is wrong? Is there a difference between mass and pressure shifts? Is there a difference between mass moving back versus pressure moving back? So if you could just touch up a little bit on that one, I think that'd be a great help to a lot of viewers here.
Yeah, so if we looked at, I guess to keep it really simple, pressure is more to do with the forces applied, like the vertical force that's applied during the swing. And that's normally... So
it's basically a force which is working towards you when you push down. And it's vertical in nature, right? Yeah, that's right.
Correct. When we look at the center of mass, we're looking at, let's say, a point somewhere in this area of the body. And I would say what you kind of mentioned there, traditionally, it was taught that this center of mass, probably not so much the lower body, but because I think we know that we're not looking for this to happen, but the upper body can just kind of freely move across, something like that.
That's right. That used to be the older systems.
Yeah. So we have a big kind of shift off the ball, and the student then has to kind of move back on the ball, you know, as they go through, something like that.
Right.
And it's not that that's, I mean, there's certainly players that would still do that and still hit the ball really solid. I think the thing that we've found over the years teaching certainly lower level golfers, you know, avid golfers, they just tend to kind of move everything everywhere. So they're taking this lower center and upper center and they're kind of translating that way off the ball, and they kind of never get back to the ball. You know, they're hitting behind it, the weight's falling back, all that sort of thing. So they're moving their mass around so much that they can't even create a consistent strike on the ball. So what we're really looking at is to get them to keep the center of, their mass more in this section here, between the feet, but they're still moving pressure. Now this is hard to see unless you've got force plates or some sort of like measuring device, but basically as soon as I start to get momentum to the right, let's say about here, even though it doesn't look like it, I've probably moved 60% or more of my pressure into my right foot.
Right.
And as the club starts to kind of move through the time and space of the backswing, it's just probably about the furthest point where my center of pressure is going to be. some that 65, some that 75. Now, some move early in transition, so they would recenter the weight a little bit quicker. And all that means is the club's approaching the top, the center of pressure is going to start to move left earlier. And that could mean that at the top of the swing, they're at 50-50, very, very common. Some move it a little bit later. Oops, some move it a little bit later, and they still might have 60-40. And some actually don't move the center of pressure much at all to the right. So they tend to be in more of a 50-50 range. So when they go into transition, now they're already at like, or excuse me, when they're kind of about to reach transition, they're already in like a 60-40 scenario. Very hard to tell, I'd say, with the naked eye, but those are the sort of three patterns that we tend to see. Personally, when I'm teaching, I'm not looking for a really big shift off the ball. If it's a experienced player, I work with a really good Malaysian player, Danny Chia, who's been around for a long time. You know, he moves his center of mass a little bit off the ball. You know, I'm always trying to keep it a little bit more centered, but you know, he's always gone a little this way, and he comes back on top of it. That's his pattern. You know, he's won twice in the Asian Tour. I can't mess around with that too much. But certainly, if it's someone struggling with contact, that's what I'm looking at. Right.
So Golf is asking you, how do I get G'd out? You have G moves?
Yeah, yeah. He could probably answer that while he's sitting at the airport waiting for the plane. He's going to be the only one taking a flight for the next month. So.
Right. So let me just try to pick up some of the questions which are action related. So let's see. Or if you want to touch up on something which you find interesting in the meantime, and you find commonality between across a lot of levels, something that you want to touch up on the golf swing, which is something that you want to share with everyone, that what comes up commonly.
Yeah, I mean, if I was getting into, I guess, more of an avid golfer, I haven't taught enough amateur golfers in India to know that, but there's definitely still a big epidemic of slicers out there.
Oh yeah, of course.
And how much can you see of me here, Romit? Can you see all of me, or just bottom?
Till your shin bone, yeah, from the right from the top. You can bring it down about 2-3 inches if you want. We have a little bit room above your head.
Okay. How's that?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's fine.
All right.
That's good.
Yeah. So I
can't see the ball though. It's still just about 6 inches below your knee. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Now your feet are just barely visible.
How's that?
Yeah, I think we get your feet now. Yeah, your feet are there. The ball is barely coming into the screen.
Okay, that's fine.
That's okay.
If I go too low, you won't be able to see my head, or?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we'll stick with that. Well, I'll use my small club. It's fine. Yeah.
But if you get into your stance, maybe we will be able to. So you can go down a bit more. Yeah.
Okay.
When you take your address position, your head will go down a bit. Yeah. Yeah. We still have space. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I think we should be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing, you know, when I'm working with let's say a club level golfer, maybe they're a mid handicapper. I like to actually show them how to hit different shots, but not necessarily change something. Now I kind of say that in a funny way, because ultimately I am looking to make, you know, an adjustment to what they're doing. But let's say that someone comes to me and maybe they're a typical slicer. Right. What I tend to see is they may have a slightly weak grip, meaning the lead hands turn too much to the left.
Right.
And normal wrist conditions, they leave the face open. Maybe they aim a bit to the left because they're slicing it and they've got the ball forward. So, you know, a lot of people come to me with this setup. Now you might look at that and go, what's wrong with that setup? It looks like a pretty functional setup. Well, in this setup, the slice is already built in. And you might say, well, you know, how does that work? Well, it pretty much works like this. And if I grab these, can you see these shafts I'm putting on the ground?
Yes, that's right. I can. The path? Yeah.
Yeah. So if we looked at, I'll get one more stick here as well. If we looked at this here, and we looked at the lead shoulder as the center of the swing, or where the club wants to bottom out. Now, if you've got a ball position that's a little bit forward, and then you've got a stance that's open, all of a sudden you're shifting the path to the left too much.
Right. If you can go down maybe 3 more inches with the camera, or go backwards into the curtain. Yeah.
Can't go backwards?
Yeah, you can go backwards into the curtain. Now it's completely visible. Yeah, that's right. That's good. That's great.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. So what's happening here is, if I just took the club here and swung through, I'm going to be swinging across the ball to the left.
Okay.
If that kind of comes through. So that would be an open face slice. Now, often what I'll do with that student is I won't actually change the grip. What I'll do is I'll close the face, just like when you hit a bunker shot, sometimes you'll open the face first. I hear that a lot. I just open the face and take my grip. But a lot of people don't think to close the face first, then just take whatever normal grip you have. So now we're in a situation where, if I can find it here, I think you could maybe see that okay on the camera. I got the face pointing to the left a lot.
Right.
And that normally kind of freaks them out. But if I got them back here and I said, we're going to move the ball back on the arc, which promotes more of an inside path. Right. And if I said to them, keep pushing your hands forward until that little magnet there points straight, all of a sudden we're in this setup. And it creates a very different looking setup. Now, I haven't changed the grip. I've just changed the face orientation, and I've changed the ball position, which is actually changing the path. And if I wanted to, I may even just reorientate the feet a little bit, because that's going to have an effect on the path. But all of a sudden, just in this setup alone, and if I raise the handle a little bit as well, that can be an important one. So say before they were down here, and then I raise the handle up, all of a sudden it gets the wrist in a position where it's more of a closed face alignment versus an open face. And they've probably got a very high chance that they're not going to slice it from there, probably.
Right. So you're building more like a draw into the system itself.
Building a draw, yeah. Now, sometimes I'll show the student that, and I'll tell them that you don't have to do this as a normal, as your on-course golf swing, but I think it can be important to know. It can be important to know that the further I move the ball back, and the more that I close the face, and the more that I push the shaft forward, the more I'm going to draw that golf ball. It starts to get a little bit exaggerated, right? But how many of our students come to us looking like this anyway?
80% maybe.
Yeah, so they don't really realize what they look like anyway, and the implications that it's going to have on the ball flight. So I think sometimes showing them the opposite end of the spectrum and telling them that this is, because some of our students are very, what's the word I'm trying to use here? They're going to kind of rebut everything that we say, right? They're not going to kind of go with us.
Very fixed in their ideas. Very fixed in their ideas, yeah.
So sometimes I'll just show them this is a different way to do it. It's an option. This, you're doing this. Well, this is option 2 or option 3. Give them a go. Aside from that, I'm just going to tell them how this new idea is going to produce a different flight. And then it's really up to them if they want to commit to it. I think sometimes the biggest challenge when we work with students, especially, when I was a young coach as well, I'm like, well, there's a weak grip. Okay, we have to turn the grip this way. We have to bring the hand around. And they're just like, they're a club level golfer. They're going to go and play, in 2 days' time on the weekend. And they're like, I can't do that. Like, as soon as you change someone's attachment or how this moves around the golf club, that's normally a long time before they're getting comfortable with it. So I try to be less invasive in that sense when I'm starting out, and then I can add things in as we get a little bit more trust and we start to see a change in the ball. Because as soon as the ball starts to do something different in a positive way, then you're probably going to be able to, be a little bit more open with what you can, what information you can share with that student.
Right. Another question comes up with you. You can answer that normally on your while taking a seat. But
Sure.
9-year-old kids playing with 15-degree driver lofts.
How's my how am I there?
Perfect.
Okay.
You're full. You're just normal.
Yep.
So 9-year-old kids playing with a 15-degree driver loft in a driver, or using a 9-year-old kid playing with a 15-degree loft in a driver, or using 11-degree driver. Which one will he get more distance from? We'll just wait for Stephen to reconnect again. Yeah, we kind of went through that 1 hour barrier. Now Stephen needs to join back again, so we'll just wait for him to rejoin. Got it, Stephen. I'm just sending it to you again.
Super. Oh, we smashed through the 1 hour, did we?
Yeah, I didn't even realize that we were talking for 1 hour.
Right.
That was quick. So we'll just do a little bit more, and then because these guys are really. So we'll just continue with that question that was posted. Anybody who had posted a question and we got knocked out of that previous session can repost again, so that we can get those questions going once more. Thanks. And we're going to go back to that previous question, which was 15-degree driver versus 11-degree driver for a 9-year-old.
Yeah, so I think a simple way, I'm not sure if this came through before, it must have got cut out, but if I have a garden hose, and let's say I place that at a certain angle, we'll just call this at 9 degrees, and I have a certain amount of pressure. Let's say I have a small amount of pressure, there's not much speed coming out of the hose. So this is going to kind of take off. It's going to kind of take off, and it's going to dip down like this. There's not a lot of speed. If I push that angle up, let's say another 5 degrees or so, with the same amount of pressure, it's going to stay in the air for longer, and then it's going to dip down. So essentially, there's going to be more carry there. Now, I'm not great at equations, and I'm not like a TrackMan master, but there's a certain equation somewhere where more speed is required for less loft and vice versa. But I think it's fair to say that 11 or 10 degrees, let's say a 9-year-old's only going to have 75 miles an hour of clubhead speed, maybe less. They would definitely need more loft to kind of maximize the carry and ultimately the distance. All things being equal, no wind, fairways that are going to give us a little bit of roll, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, you're right, because TrackMan data is a proven theory, and it says anything below 75 miles an hour or up to 75 miles an hour, angle of attack is king. So basically, if you hit it more up, you get more loft. You'll obviously fly the ball much more than you would if you're hitting it with an 11-degree driver. So definitely with a slower clubhead speed, a 15-degree driver would definitely give you a little bit more carry, and that's what we're looking for, Because on a dry golf course, it's okay where the ball rolls, but the moment it starts raining and gets a little softer, or you need to carry bunkers and stuff like that on the golf course, it becomes more difficult for that person.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing is that 11 years old, it kind of doesn't really matter how far you hit it. because you're 11.
9 years old.
Even more so at 9 years old. You know, it doesn't really matter kind of what's going on. Distance, you know, a 9-year-old can't hit it too far offline anyway. So they're just trying to smash it as far as possible. But definitely having more loft is going to help them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got another one where they want to show, can you show me some drills for push hooks? I guess he's saying something to avoid push hooks, is it? Or you, oh, sorry, to hit push hooks. Maybe big draws.
Push draw. Yeah, well, again, what I mentioned before. Yeah, what I mentioned before was is what I'd look at. I might have to spin that around again. Yep.
Yep.
Let me spin that around and you tell me what we're looking at there.
Okay, a little bit down. You can go a little bit lower. Just a little bit more. Give me about 4 or 5 inches more. That's good. That's good. That's a little bit too much. You can go back a bit. That's it. That's good. Good. Perfect.
Got it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So if I was going to teach someone to hit a push hook, it's very much what I explained earlier. I would close the face some amount.
Right.
If I, you know, I'd close the face in some amount. I'd let them take their normal grip.
Right.
I'd push the handle forward till the face pointed slightly to the right.
Right.
And then I'd come back and get them to set up. So I'd have them set up in this kind of situation here. Very, very important. And again, for me, it's a bit of a non-negotiable. You need to have the ball back on the arc. So if this is about where we'd have the driver, where the white stick is, we want to have the ball, if we want a solid push hook, I would say if this is 0 and this was 1, 2, 3, if I put the ball all the way back, let's say where it would be on 4, that's going to create a very solid push hook.
So just for the understanding of all the viewers here, where you've got the line on your left heel, that's basically the bottom of the arc, right? Or the bottom of the swing, yeah? That's the bottom of the swing arc, that's right.
Yeah.
So you're hitting it just before the bottom of the arc, so that means it's going to hit the ball and then bottom out. Correct.
Correct, yeah.
So it's a downward action.
So there's about, we call that about 3 or so back from 0. It's hard to put the ball on there, but you probably get the idea there.
Right.
Comes through.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I mean, if it's a, you know, better players, as soon as they did this, they're going to be drawing the ball really aggressively. But if it was an average golfer that struggled, I would literally just start them off with their arms pretty straight.
Right.
Create just a mini turn going back, and get them to hit a shot without changing the club face orientation there.
Right.
So the more stable that they can keep this, you know, they're not kind of breaking down, opening up the face. They don't need to cross the club over in this fashion here. It's obviously going to send the ball like way too far left and probably cause, you know, a weak impact. But they're basically just learning how to control the face by keeping it in, I'd say, a single position. Right. And then just using their pivot, if you like, to bring the club back in and around and through.
Super explanation. So that's a good way of doing the push hook. Now, what happens if someone has a problem with a push hook and wants to avoid the push hook?
I'm gonna kind of reverse some of those areas. So, I mean, typically, I'm not trying to move the ball back much further than, I would say, about 2 balls back for like a soft draw.
So you move the ball ahead a bit here.
Yeah, I tend to have a ball position, which is the second ball that you see there.
Right.
And what's actually happening is, if you can notice that this little section here gets much more narrow.
Right.
And this, I mean, this in some respects is a description of how wide the path is being, or narrow the path is being. Right. So it's right there. By just aligning myself a little bit to the left, tends to bring everything back around, as I kind of explained before.
Yeah.
And now I'm in a position where my I mean, even as I'm standing here with my feet open and, you know, looking there into the wall, I feel like from there, because in order to get to that ball, I have to get a little bit more open with my body. I have to be a bit more in this position. Naturally, I'm swinging more across the ball. So I have the swing direction moving left. You know, the biggest variable can be, you know, what to do with the club face. Some students might like to add some openness to the face before they start. Some might just like to feel like they hold the club face position a little bit more stable going through. And what I've found with good players, as soon as you change the path, their instinct of how they use the face is going to change almost straight away. For good players. So as soon as I get them swinging left, they're not going to be closing the face. Yeah, they're going to find a way to orientate the face so it's directed, you know, along their start line. Just like, you know, if it was back in this position here, they're going to figure out a way to orientate the face. Sometimes they need some guidance, but I've found with better players, they can do that much more instinctively for sure.
Right. Well, another question which comes out is another important demonstration. He says to please demonstrate the role of the right foot during the downswing, especially around the impact. That's an interesting one. Stephen, you'll love that. Yeah,
that is an interesting one. So roll the right foot on the downswing. So what I like to see. So what I would like to see as we start down, because we have a change in knee flex on the way back, and let's just say if I start with, I'll do it this way first. If I start with, let's say 20 degrees of knee flex, and maybe at the top of the swing I have about 5 degrees. That'd be pretty common. You know, I'm not completely locked out, but I'm going to lose some amount of knee flex. Some pros would do a bit less, and occasionally some will do a bit more. So what I'm looking for from the top of the swing to, let's say, left arm parallel, is the knee's going to go back start to go back down into flexion. So I hope that comes through pretty good on the camera there. Yeah. So by the time we get down to almost to where the club's parallel to the ground, I would say this knee's back into flexion there.
That's right.
What we'd also see from the face-on view is, because there's some amount of there's some forward movement. This knee is going to go from a position where, let's say it's pointing just slightly outward, not a great deal, but slightly outward, to coming back inward some amount. It's definitely not going out here, and we're not going to have it like kick in too early as well. Can it do that and still be functional? Sure, but that would be just some of the things I would look for. So by the time that we get kind of down to this position here, the knee's retained its flex, and it's probably at this point here, the knees are going to be almost in a very similar position to where they started, probably even a little bit more flexed, I would say. And we also would see the right heel starting to kind of, I use the word banking or rolling in, and that's for the reason of where the weight's moving. If the weight's moving back, we see the heel, if this comes through, the heel kind of spins back. You know, if the weight's moving some amount forward as we're rotating, you can see that the heel leads the toes. That's something I'm often looking for. And really through here, we have a combination of rotation, which comes from the hips, which pulls the knee in, and we start to have the pelvis extending as it's pushing forward. So we start to see this trail leg also straightening. So that's kind of happening, you know, around the impact zone and certainly after the impact zone.
So is there an action or a drill that you can do to train that trail right foot, the way it works through the swing?
So I like doing, for students, this is something I see quite often, especially with, again, I'd say golfers that really struggle to control the contact point, and I see them kind of falling back this way a lot. So the knee kind of kicks out, and they kind of spin back this way. So what I like to do is,
the heel kind of turns around. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it kind of spin back this way. It'd be kind of a very typical slicer move. So what I would do is, I'm not afraid to turn this foot out. I mean, almost completely, 90 degrees, but I go 45 or more. So it's kind of completely this way. And I'm always making sure, because at the end of the day, if you go back and you keep this flexed,
right,
it's going to tend to work in a weird way. The weight's
Correct.
going to be onto the weight's going to be under the toes. You know, everything's going to kind of push forward and move this way. So I'm always making sure first and foremost that there's a change in knee flex.
right.
And then from there, the student can feel like they're pushing forward and rolling the heel. In fact, I've got, let's see if I have it here, because I was just reorganizing
Right.
my kit here.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't have it. Give me 1 second here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little slider sometimes that I use when I'm teaching, and that can actually be a really good tool.
Right.
Sometimes I'll do things like this. I will get
A bottle? Yeah, perfect.
a water bottle.
Behind the heel.
I'll place it outside the heel.
Yeah.
So when they're in this position here, they have to make sure that they're moving more this way.
Right.
Yeah, they're not.
Will this also help in the hip going into more lateral movement rather than rotating right from the top?
Exactly, yeah. So for a student who's backing up this way,
That's right.
they need to feel some lateral movement, and that actually pulls the heel inward.
Right.
And then from there they can keep kicking that up. Yeah.
Perfect.
Sometimes
Like a
in
little Norman
extreme,
there.
yeah, sometimes in extreme circumstances, we'll even give them what we call the bowler drill,
Right.
which is from the top of the swing, they'll actually pull the foot back this way, which is exactly what we see with Greg Norman, we see it with Tiger Woods.
Yeah,
You know, we
that's
see
right.
we see it with a lot of golfers. Often we see that because of the forces that's applied, and it's kind of kicking back. But sometimes in some circumstances, I'll give the student that drill that actually glide the foot back inside,
Right.
and they might even do that with the right foot pulled back as well. So they'll do that with this sort of foot position.
Super.
That sort of thing for the students that are kind of going too much that way.
Yeah. Super explanation there.
Yeah.
Super. That because that right knee kicking in also kind of extends you early in the downswing, and this will also kind of take care of that early extension a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, I find a lot of it is getting the first part would even be set up, how they're organizing the backswing, which then leads to some of these things that we see on the downswing. I think too many students, because they're just looking at certain positions, they're trying to, let's say, improve a position, but they don't realize that it's what's happened before or even further back that's maybe caused that, which is where obviously, information, and having an experienced eye is very important.
Right. I think that's the end of the demo session, so we can just go through a few static questions.
Yep.
And well, there was one particular one. Okay, let me just catch up with the questions. We've gone down the list. The right foot roll, fantastic. What sort of ways do you recommend training with drills and strength and conditioning work throughout the week? How does this change for week-based to month-based goal setting with training?
Strength. It's a strength and conditioning training question.
Yes. What sort of ways do you recommend training with drills and strength and conditioning work throughout the week?
Well, first thing I'd say, I'm not an expert in strength and conditioning. I'm very mindful of it. I certainly recommend it. I mean, the only suggestion would be that, like, when I'm working with players, let's say on technique versus tournaments, you've got to be mindful of how much let's say you've got a tournament coming up, you're probably doing more maintenance work and trying to keep certain muscles activated, whether that's TheraBand work, etc., whatever it is you're doing with your trainer, versus, during this time, we have 2 months off, we have 3 months off. Oh, I wanted to get, my glutes stronger, I wanted to get my legs stronger or whatever. So I think that's a time where you consciously work on maybe an area of your body that's weak or that needs to be strengthened. Just like during this time, it's great because we're only able to hit indoors and hit into net. It's great to work on a piece of your swing. maybe it's a wrist condition. Maybe it is some footwork that you need to do, and you kind of hammer out that one area. So I can't give advice on something that I'm not that versed in, but I would say your trainer's probably going to get you to be doing more heavy stuff during this time, because you're not really playing, versus during tournaments, which is going to be more maintenance and just, making sure that you're staying injury free. Right.
Good answer. How much difference does the type of golf ball, Titleist, Srixon, Callaway, etc., affect your game? The difference in brands,
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, I'd say it's really different, because I think it's what they get used to. Although the golf ball manufacturers now are pretty, I mean, the top guys are doing certainly an impressive job. And I think it also comes down to knowing, your spin characteristics. And this is kind of getting into higher level. I mean, certainly at a junior level, I think it makes almost zero difference. But once you start to get into elite junior level, you'll know if you're able to put more or less spin on your wedges. You'll know if you need, less spin on your driver. And golf balls, I mean, they're very good nowadays, but, certain golf balls can accommodate more or less, depending on what your requirement is.
Right. Perfect. Okay, another question comes in.
Yeah.
How do you correct an open club face on the downswing?
So I'm looking at where it's coming from. So let's assume that they've got a decent grip, and maybe they even took it to the top of the swing, and it looked pretty decent, and all of a sudden, like, the face got open.
We can't catch the top of the swing, though. If you want to raise the camera.
Okay. Yeah. How's that?
Yeah, I think we should be able to catch both. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yes. Yes. Let's say they've got a fairly neutral grip, and they take it to the top, and the face condition's pretty good, and all of a sudden they open the face here. There's normally one of two things could have happened. They might have increased or twisted, applied too much force on the handle and kind of twisted it in an open manner. I'm probably going to dive into what are they feeling. I'm certainly looking at what's happening. What are they feeling that's causing that? Sometimes it can be also a loss of grip pressure, where they lose the back three fingers out, the pressure point there, and it opens the face. So they might have to actually feel like they're twisting the club face the opposite way. Right. Often I'll use a device like a hanger, which can give them the feeling of getting the wrist more into this kind of flex position versus this kind of open and extended position. And that tends to create quite a different pattern here halfway down. So it could be a sense of what they're doing with their wrist, how they're applying force to the handle, and how they're twisting the face that cause it to be open. So playing around with different feels and trying to give them an opposite feel is probably what I'd go for. Of course, I'm looking at kind of what their body's doing and things like that. But if we're just talking about the club face, that's something that can be looked at if grip and top of swing position were in order.
Yeah. Before we go to the next question, which is to do with the top of the swing, if you could just explain how the club face looks as in a square position, closed, and an open position on the top of the backswing. I mean, what it looks like.
Does that come in? Does that look okay there?
Yeah, that's fine. So
yes, I'd say that would be reasonably square.
Right.
This would be more of a open position.
So with the toe hanging straight down would be more like an open position.
Toes hanging down. Yep. Yeah. And the other one would be where the toes pointing more towards the sky.
More the face is kind of pointing at the sky up there, so that's more like a closed position.
Face would be pointing at the sky, would be more of a closed position. So you got very closed, reasonably square, and getting toe down would be quite open.
Okay, great. So now we can go to the next question. How can we correct the wrist position on the top of the backswing if it's a little underneath the path and overswung, which causes movements in the ball both ways? So I guess what he's trying to say, if it's underneath the path and basically overswing?
So, I mean, an overswing can happen for different reasons. It can happen because there's a breakdown of the elbows. It can happen because we have a lot of like twisting of the club face. It can happen because we lose pressure points in the fingers. And probably, I would say the first and the second one of those things are probably the two that I see the most. I see a lot of breakdown in the arms. We call this like the extensor action. We see a loss of that. And I also see a loss in the pressure points. And that's the kind of back three fingers of the left hand, if you like. We see that the pad specifically of the right hand on the thumb, that pressure point gets lost. And you can see kind of what happens when I do that. The club wants to kind of dangle or fall. If I let it go out of these, it also wants to dangle and fall. So there's a lot of small things there that we're paying attention to and seeing which one's influencing what. Sometimes the student might need to feel like they're pushing out. Hopefully you can see that okay. The pad of the right hand pushes out on the thumb of the left and creates some stretch in the arms and also creates some stability in the club face.
Right.
Or I should say, creates some stability in the club itself. And I'm also making sure that the back three fingers of the left hand are stable on the club. Because again, when this starts to loosen, that you can see the club wants to flop. Again, I would tend to say, at least from what I see, a lot of these things happen more as the club's moving to the top or, you know, some part of the backswing. It's not normally just a downswing thing. So I'm always trying to stabilize their top of swing because that ultimately is going to have, you know, some influence on how the downswing is going to look. You know, if I've got a student that is collapsed at the top and they've lost their pressure point, you know, they're going to have a hard time screwing the face up because it's wide open. Because this wrist has gone completely into a cupped position there. Yep. And they're going to come down with a wide open face. You know, it might look something like this, and they're going to struggle to screw it up from there. So hopefully that answers the question. I'm looking at how they're controlling the club, how they're controlling their arms to the top of the swing.
So lots of micromanagement between the wrists and the club face over there, both in kind of a pure balance to get the club face in order. Okay, the last question you can take sitting down. We'll just do the last one so that I think we've had a lot of your expert advice on things. And this kind of puts it all together. Golf being quite an expensive sport, considering equipment, coaching, fitness, nutrition, and mental training, etc., how critical is it to engage a professional for each of these aspects, and if on a continuous basis?
Depends what age, for sure. I would say if it's a fairly young junior golfer, I would say a coach like yourself and myself can wear many hats for quite a long time. Maybe not on the fitness part of thing. I think that's, you know, a little bit different. That needs someone with a bit more expertise. But certainly on the course management side, you know, certainly on, you know, the mental aspects of the game and the coaching side of it, I feel like, I mean, I've had some students work with me their whole career and not bring in like someone higher up, say as a sports psychologist. But I would say, you know, when you get to maybe 15, 16, that sort of time, you know, there's often some patterns creep in with the students, you know, how they're dealing with situations on the golf course, you know, and someone with experience, expertise in that area can be very helpful. But I would say find a good coach and let them kind of nurture them, you know, all the way up into their kind of mid-teens.
Right. You kind of you kind of put it all together over there. Yeah, the coach is more not just someone who does the technical swing training.
Definitely not.
He can be a mentor. He can be your psychologist. He can be your friend, and he can be your guide.
Absolutely.
And, you know, all the encouragement can come from a coach. I mean, he can wear multiple hats, as you said, and definitely we may have to go to a fitness and nutrition expert for those kind of specialities. And maybe later in life, when he's in a situation arises where the psychology part is creating an issue, you can always refer to someone who's very well versed in that area. And I think these are all things that you and me have done. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing I would say is, you know, as a parent, there's obviously a lot of responsibilities, a lot of like unknowns, but you know, a lot of this stuff is common sense as well. I mean, I'm sure as a parent, you know what foods are going to be, you know, nutritious for your, you know, your son, daughter on a day-to-day basis, like during tournaments, you know, how much carbs they should be eating, the fact that they shouldn't be gobbling down lots of chocolates and things like that, where they're going to get sugar rushes. It's not, you know, it's not rocket science, I'd say, at that sort of age. And, you know, just also from a psychology standpoint, you know, when your son, daughter talks to you after the round, you know, what sort of feedback are they giving you and what's your response? I think that's also very important. And again, I think parents can do a lot more than what they think. They can probably become more aware of some of these things. And I really feel like the parent probably plays a bigger role than the coach in a lot of ways, because you and I really don't spend as much time. We don't really spend much time at all with the student. When you look at the life cycle of them, it's really the parent and the student themselves. So I like to make sure that my student is very aware of their like self-talk, if that's an issue, and I try and get them to develop that and understand that sort of side of it. Right. But also, again, I think the parent plays an important role, and you know, they have to be as patient, or they have to understand, you know, it's a long-term game. It's going to take 10 to 15 years to reach the level that they're aspiring to, and they have to exercise a lot of patience sometimes when, you know, things aren't working out or the performances aren't there, because that's just the nature of, you know, it's the nature of the game. And, you know, it's just part of life. Like, no one knew that we're going to be stuck inside for 3 months, a couple of months ago. So, you know, it allows just to think about a lot of things and a lot of change. And I think that, I think that's an important point, just to understand that, you know, the ups and downs and the waves that you're going to go through. You know, good times and bad, they're going to be there, and we just got to learn to be resilient and patient and look at the big picture.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephen, for that insight, and a lot of little details over there in Stephen's, the last 1.5 hours that we spent with him. And I know there's another question which keeps coming up, which says, can you suggest some drills or exercises to increase swing speed? But I guess we'll also leave that for some of the physical fitness guys who are coming on to this chat. I think they will be better equipped to actually answer the kind of exercises that you need to do to increase, you know, acceleration in your golf swing. So sure. I think, but Stephen, I think your expertise is been very well explained in this session, and thank you so much. But in these times, I would also like to appeal to everyone who's been watching in that please take care of the guys who can't fend for themselves at in these tough times. You know, there are lots of guys over there who didn't really plan for this, and just like us, we might have had a little bit of reserves with us, but lots of guys don't really have that, and they work day to day to earn their living. And if you guys can reach out to some of those guys, it'll be great. It'll be very helpful for them. You know, they might be very proud people who might not even tell you that they have this problem, but do reach out. And if you think that you can help in any way, just go ahead and do it, and, you know, take care of them. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for being here. And
thanks everyone for listening.
On the other side of the lockdown. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely, man. Cheers.